Hey guys, tonight we're going way back to the opulent incense-scented corridors of the Ottoman Empire, where winter didn't mean huddling under a plastic poncho or grabbing a polyester parka from the back of the closet. No, winter meant swanning around in layered silk robes, brocaded kaftans, and fur-trimmed hats that could double as pillows. Outside, the wind might be gnawing at the corners of the empire, whipping over Anatolian hills or rattling against the tiled domes of Istanbul's mosques. But inside, you're bundled like a slice of baklava, soft, sweet, multi-layered. And if the cold dares try anything, you've got a backup robe lined with squirrel fur, just in case. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time down below. I always love seeing where in the world we're falling asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a creaky divan, the kind with thick cushions and a fringe that brushes your ankles. The fire's still smoldering in the brazier beside you, its warm breath perfuming the air with traces of cedar and ash. You've been layered up since dusk, cotton undershirt, long linen tunic, padded inner robe, and now your outer kaftan, the real showstopper. It's ruby red with golden tulips embroidered down the front, and the sleeves are so wide they practically deserve their own entrance. It's winter in the Ottoman Empire, maybe mid-17th century. Snow dusts the rooftops like powdered sugar, and the Bosphorus looks like it might freeze over if it had the nerve. You pull your kaftan tighter. The lining velvet, deep blue, the kind of blue you only get from crushed lapis lazuli and minor fortune. You shuffle across the stone floor in slippers that have seen better days. Beneath them, your woolen socks bunch a little at the heel, woven by hand, patterned with tiny diamonds, maybe a gift. Ottoman layering wasn't just fashion, it was survival. Heating in homes was minimal, even in palaces. So everyone from sultans to scribes layered up like decorative onions. Mainstream historians often describe Ottoman fashion as luxurious and heavily influenced by Central Asian nomadic styles, which makes sense. You can't ride horseback across the steppe in skinny jeans. But there's something surprisingly domestic, almost cozy, in how layers functioned in the Ottoman winter, every piece part of a soft, elaborate puzzle. A quirky tidbit: some kaftans came with secret pockets, not for smartphones, obviously, but for little bundles of musk rose petals or cloves. So when you moved, your body heat released tiny scented puffs. You weren't just warm, you were a walking air freshener. You slide open a wooden shutter to peek outside. The alley below is quiet. A cat pads through a dusting of snow. Across the courtyard, you glimpse a woman hanging quilts from a line, maybe to beat out the dust or let them air. Her sleeves are quilted and down to her knuckles. Her scarf is wound so many times you wonder if she can hear herself think. You consider adding another layer, maybe the padded vest with brass buttons. Ottoman vests called yelek were sleeveless and often made of silk or velvet quilted with cotton batting. They added warmth without bulk. Though if you're wearing 5 other garments, bulk is a given. Historians still argue whether these winter garments were purely practical or also coded symbols, markers of class, region, or office. One theory that a robe's color or trim indicated what court function you held. Another theory, everyone just liked showing off their fabric budget. You slump back down onto your cushion and sip something steaming. Apple tea rosehip infusion. The Ottomans loved their warm drinks, especially in the colder months, and tea was social glue served to guests, traded in markets, poured ceremoniously, even during dull bureaucratic meetings. Your hands warm around the cup, and for a moment the layers don't matter. You are the warmth. A boy passes by the open door, his robe trailing slightly behind him. He's barefoot, his toes pink from the cold. He's humming something, the kind of low, tuneless murmur that kids make when they're not really thinking. You pull your robe tighter again, always a good idea. At the center of this empire, sprawling and stitched together, like the very robes its people wore, was the awareness that you had to adapt. The winter chill in Edirne wasn't the same as the frost in Erzurum, so clothing was flexible, modular. Swap out a sash, add a second robe, double up on socks. Your wardrobe became a toolkit. And speaking of sashes, yours is silk wrapped 3 times and knotted with casual flair. Tucked inside it a small leather pouch, a strip of dried quince, and a clove-studded handkerchief that smells like something between your grandmother's spice drawer and an apothecary's mystery shelf. You have no intention of using any of them tonight, but they're there like little charms against the cold. The wind whistles through the corridor again, teasing the bottom hem of a hanging tapestry. You glance up. It's a scene of birds in cypress trees embroidered in dull gold thread. The birds wear tiny crowns, and you're not sure if that's symbolic or just whimsical. Either way, they look smug about it. Outside, snow begins to fall, again slow, deliberate flakes, the kind that seem to hover in the air before deciding to land. You lean back, swaddled in your kaftan layers, your wool, your hidden perfumes and padded cotton armor. Warm, weighty, slightly ridiculous. Just the way the Ottomans liked it. Your feet shuffle toward the wooden door as another draft snakes across the floor. You tug your yelek closer, the quilted vest hugging your sides like a warm whisper. Outside, the scent of pine smoke hangs in the crisp air like a comforting ghost. Ottoman mornings in winter arrive gently. No blaring alarms, just the muffled sounds of slippers on stone and the rhythmic clink of brass teapots being set to boil. You step into the courtyard, breath puffing out like miniature clouds. A servant carries in logs stacked carefully in a cradle of cloth. He's bundled in a striped antari, the long outer robe faded and patched at the hem. His hands are red from the cold, but he hums cheerfully. You nod at him, clutching your own sleeves a little tighter. One shouldn't let winter make them look grumpy. It's not the Ottoman way. Your layered silhouette casts a long shadow across the snow-dusted tiles. And as you cross the courtyard, it strikes you winter wasn't just endured here. It was styled, worn like an extra garment. Every step from your room to the garden is a runway walk in slow motion. The Ottomans turned functionality into fashion and fashion into subtle messaging. Velvet trims whispered, "I have taste." Lamb fur collars murmured, "and possibly money." Mainstream history often puts the spotlight on military might or architectural grandeur. But let's be real, not every winter day was a conquest. Some were just about staying warm without looking like a snow-drenched turnip. You adjust your sarek, that layered turban curling around your head in swirls of soft linen and wool, and remember, even headwear was an art. Historians still argue whether certain turban shapes were tied to political affiliations or simply to regional trends. A double fold here, an exaggerated peak there, some say it was your personal billboard. Others think it was just cold outside and everyone was winging it. You pass a wooden bench where an older man sits, hands wrapped in fingerless mittens, robe pooled around his legs like melting fabric. His kaftan is striped like a candy cane, albeit one that's seen a few winters. He sees you and lifts a hand lazily. "Too many layers," he grins, "and you'll forget your own name." You grin back. He's not wrong. Your underlayers alone could qualify as a novella. Let's recap: inner shirt, long tunic, padded robe, quilted vest, kaftan, sash, scarf, and turban. If you sneeze too hard, one of these is definitely coming loose. You wander through the garden. The fig trees are bare, their branches etched against the sky like cracked porcelain. A woman in a fur-lined cloak adjusts ceramic pots on a brazier. She's cooking something that smells suspiciously like lentils and garlic, an Ottoman winter staple. Nothing fancy, just hearty warming and likely to linger in your breath until next Tuesday. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind in the Ottoman court. Some members of the elite had winter servants whose sole job was to warm their clothing before they dressed. Imagine that your own human preheater. And yes, you're tempted. The woman offers you a ladle of stew. You accept cupping the warm ceramic bowl in your mittened hands. It's thick and comforting, the kind of food that sticks to your ribs and doesn't let go until March. As you eat, you watch the snow fall in soft diagonals, quieting even the city's chaos. The empire was vast, spanning from the Balkans to the Arabian Peninsula, so winter fashion had to be both regional and adaptable. In the high-altitude regions of Anatolia, shepherds wore heavy felt cloaks called kepenek, shaped like tents and resistant to snow. You're not wearing one now, but you've seen them giant conical things that make wearers look like walking yurts, cozy yurts. Elsewhere in wealthier circles, layering became a competitive sport. Silks imported from Bursa, furs from the Caucasus, embroidery techniques borrowed from Persia. Ottoman fashion was global long before your favorite brand started shipping internationally. But here's the thing, despite all this luxury, modesty remained key. Even in winter, the goal wasn't to flash skin, it was to flash craftsmanship. A gust of wind kicks up, tugging at your scarf. You tuck it tighter, the ends falling in loose curls down your chest. The scarf, made from raw silk and dyed with indigo, was a gift from a friend last year. Still holds a faint trace of rosewater from when you accidentally wore it to the hammam. You return to the inner rooms, pushing past the heavy curtain that serves as a door. The interior welcomes you like a velvet cocoon, pillows, carpets, brass trays stacked with dried apricots and roasted chickpeas. You lower yourself into the warmth, limbs loosening, and drape another thin robe over your lap. Just because you can. An attendant brings hot water in a silver basin. Your fingers dip in, grateful. He smiles and sets down a folded cloth scented with lavender. For your neck, he says. You nod, letting the soft steam rise around your collarbone. This right here is winter in the Ottoman rhythm. Warm layers, warm hands, a moment stolen from the frost. The brazier crackles. Somewhere someone plays a ney, that breathy reed flute, whose notes sound like secrets told through fog. You exhale, the breath winding past your lips like mist. Wrapped in robe upon robe, scent upon scent, you are less a person now and more a fragrant pile of historical laundry. Outside snow gathers, inside you settle. Warm, layered, empress of your own blanket fort. The steam from your tea rises in thin, ghostly ribbons curling like silk threads into the still air. You blow gently across the surface because, let's be honest, nothing ruins winter glamour like a burnt tongue, and take a sip. It's strong spiced and a little earthy. Maybe cardamom, maybe clove. Maybe something you can't pronounce but absolutely want bottled into a candle. You lean back against a cushion, layers of wool and silk shifting around your body like the petals of a sleeping flower. The sun creeps across the wooden floor, muted by the thick cloud cover, and you stare at your toes now, wrapped in knitted wool socks patterned in tiny diamonds. Someone's grandmother worked hard on those, probably while commenting on your posture and your marriage prospects. It wasn't all opulence in the Ottoman winter wardrobe. There was plenty of homespun too. Rural folks across Anatolia and the Balkans made their own woolen garments, often dyed using plant-based pigments, madder root for red walnut shells, for brown onion skins, for an oddly pleasant yellow. You can't help but smile at the idea that someone out there was wearing an entire salad palette. A mainstream fact worth wrapping your ears around: the Ottoman textile trade was one of the largest in the early modern world, centered around cities like Bursa and Istanbul. Artisans worked in guilds or esnaf, each one mastering a specific technique. Velvet weavers, silk dyers, felt makers, they were like the Hogwarts houses of fabric. Only instead of wands they carried needles, and instead of flying broomsticks they had looms that squeaked like haunted furniture. You finger the hem of your sleeve, admiring the gold-stitched trim. Decorative, sure, but also functional. It helps reinforce the edges and prolong the life of the fabric. You wonder how many times someone ran their fingers across it before it landed in your hands. Clothing then wasn't fast fashion. It was slow, deliberate, and meant to last. Like your cousin's stories at dinner, just a lot better tailored. The scholarly debates swirl in your mind like wind through a market alley. Some historians argue that fashion in the Ottoman Empire was rigidly stratified. What you wore depended strictly on your class, religion, and gender. Others insist there was far more crossover and experimentation, especially in urban centers where trends moved faster than a spice cart on payday. You rise slowly, your robes sliding across one another in whispery layers. It's like wearing a gentle rustle. Outside your window, the city stirs. Snow-muffled footsteps crunch softly along the street. A man balances a tray of simmet, those sesame-crusted bread rings, and despite the chill, he whistles like he's in a spring meadow. Must be the warm hat, and maybe the wine from last night. You toss a cloak over your shoulders, deep green trimmed in ermine, and head out. The cloak billows behind you with a slight theatrical flair. Ottoman cloaks weren't just protection from the cold, they were a power move. A well-lined cloak signaled rank. A badly lined one signaled, well, probably that you'd had a tough year. You pass by a group of apprentices gathered near a workshop. Their noses are red, their boots worn, but their chatter is lively. One has a fur hat that's comically too large for his head. You nod at him. He shrugs and says, "It was my uncle's. He had a bigger head and less shame." It's oddly touching winter gear passed down through generations like family recipes or embarrassing holiday stories. A wool coat wasn't just wool. It was the echo of someone else's winter, someone else's fire. A quirky tidbit floats to the surface among the palace elite. It wasn't uncommon to gift clothing as tokens of favor. A robe from the sultan wasn't just a nice coat, it was a political statement, sometimes literally. There's even record of someone refusing to wear a gifted robe because the lining was made from squirrel fur. Scandalous. Fashion drama existed long before the red carpet. You turn onto a narrow street lined with shuttered shops and hammams puffing steam into the frozen sky. The smell of soap and firewood mixes in the air, and you feel your bones inch closer to melting. A woman walks past in layered skirts, a child bundled on her hip, like a fabric-wrapped dumpling. The kid's eyes peer out from beneath 3 hats and what looks suspiciously like half a curtain. You've got to respect the hustle. As you duck into a covered arcade, warmth greets you like an old friend with good snacks. Merchants are setting up shop, their stalls bright with textiles and slippers. You linger near a stack of quilted jackets, shalvar-style pants, and thick vests, dyed in bold reds and blues. The merchant catches your eye and lifts a brow. Need another layer. You smirk. Don't we all? He chuckles, waving you off with mittened hands. Everyone's chasing the one that makes winter disappear. But you know better. Winter in the Ottoman world wasn't meant to be escaped. It was meant to be embraced layer by layer like a slow story. A story stitched together with silken thread and goat wool and a little bit of leftover stew if you got sloppy at lunch. You exit the market with a new scarf wrapped tight around your neck. It smells faintly of cloves. The snow has started falling again, quiet, patient, and uninterested in your opinion of it. You wrap yourself tighter, a walking bundle of memory fashion and hot tea regrets. There's a kind of peace in it, in the slowness, in the softness, in knowing that while time passes, some things like the comfort of a good robe stay exactly the same. And if it itches a little, you scratch, you sigh, and you move on, like a very well-dressed snowball. You pause at the base of a cobbled incline, snow crunching under your boots. Somewhere a minaret chimes softly, not quite a bell, more a melodic echo drifting through the mist. It's mid-morning now, and the sky hangs low like it hasn't quite finished waking up. You can relate. Your breath swirls in tiny clouds, and the scarf around your mouth smells like every spice merchant's dream. Clove, nutmeg, and something suspiciously like dried apricot. You adjust your cloak, and it slips easily into place. It's lined in silk stitched with tiny repeating tulips. A quiet flex, really. Tulips were kind of a big deal here. imported originally from Central Asia, but truly embraced in the Ottoman world. There was an entire tulip era, no joke, where high society became obsessed with these dainty little flowers. Some say it was about beauty, some say symbolism, and some whisper it was a metaphor for fleeting pleasure. But you just think it looks good on outerwear. As you trudge up the hill, the hem of your cloak brushes the damp stones. You think about layering again, about the way Ottomans wore their fashion, like an onion with a shopping addiction. Underlayers, middle layers, outer garments, capes over the outer garments. Sometimes belts held everything in place. Sometimes they didn't, and things got breezy. Probably not ideal midwinter, but when you nail it, the outfit sings. A mainstream fact: many Ottoman garments were designed to wrap rather than button or zip, since zippers weren't really a thing unless you count emotional ones. Robes like the kaftan were overlapped and secured with sashes. This not only helped with flexibility and ventilation, but also added to that mysterious, elegant silhouette that modern designers still try to copy on runways, and usually fail, because nobody can compete with 6 layers of dignity and embroidered poetry. Speaking of poetry, some fabrics literally had it woven in, that's right. Actual verses from Rumi or other Sufi poets stitched into cuffs or linings. You never knew whether someone's sleeve was just a sleeve or a hidden message of eternal longing. It's like wearing your diary, but less cringe and more metaphysical. You pass an old man warming his hands over a brazier, thick mittens dangling from a cord around his neck like woolly pearls. He nods at you, and his beard catches a snowflake. You imagine he's seen many winters and many trends. Historians still argue whether certain winter garments, especially among soldiers and cavalry, were standardized by military decree or simply adapted regionally by need. One record might mention a fur-lined pelisse, another might describe goat hair cloaks soaked in olive oil to resist the cold. Either way, you're grateful you're not wearing chainmail. You duck into a narrow side street where brick walls trap heat from nearby kitchens. The scent of lentil soup and flatbread is an invisible embrace. You pause near a textile shop window where dyed yarns hang in great skeins like frozen fireworks. The reds are intense like pomegranate syrup, the blues deeper than regret. You spot a young apprentice inside, carefully brushing snow off a coat. On display, an ankle-length robe with quilted lining and a collar that says, "I attend council meetings, and I do read the minutes." Back on the street, a woman walks past carrying a basket on her head, her scarf wrapped in 5 separate loops around her chin. It's not just function, it's flair. A quirky tidbit from court records: there were actual fines for overly flamboyant dressing in certain periods, especially during times of economic hardship. Imagine being scolded because your winter hat sparkled too hard. You try not to laugh out loud, but it bubbles up anyway, earning you a bemused glance from a passing janissary in fur-lined boots. You step aside to let a procession of camels pass their humps, bundled in patchwork blankets. Yes, even camels got winter wear. It was a whole thing: embroidered tassels, quilted, neck warmers, the works. You once saw a miniature painting of a horse in a hooded cape. That horse looked more important than your landlord. Possibly had better manners, too. You reach a public fountain. Icicles hang from its stone arch, glinting like nature's chandeliers. Someone left a pair of mittens on the edge, tiny, hand-knit, forgotten, or maybe shared. The generosity of winter often shows up in fabric coats, exchanged scarves, loaned gloves pressed into someone's hands with a quiet "keep it." You imagine palace servants offering embroidered slippers to guests on snow-slicked marble, while street vendors shared felt wraps with freezing apprentices. Of course, the Ottoman elite had whole wardrobes dedicated to seasonal shifts. We're talking spring kaftans, summer slippers, rainy season cloaks, and snow day boots lined with lamb fleece. Some records even list separate storage rooms just for winter garments, complete with scent sachets to keep moths out. That's right. Even in the 1600s, people feared the tiny horror that is the clothes-eating insect. You hear laughter ahead and follow it to a bathhouse. Steam billows from the doors, and you catch a glimpse of men wrapped in peshtamals chatting over tea and small dishes of jam. Winter wasn't just for curling up in solitude, it was also for connection. Fireside gatherings, poetry readings, shared bowls of stew. If your cloak smelled faintly of cloves and tobacco smoke, it probably meant you were living well. You rub your gloved hands together, content. Your layers are holding up. Your scarf is doing its job. You think about how clothing was once as personal as a fingerprint tailored, gifted, inherited. A record of who you were, who loved you, and who thought you needed another wool hat because the last one looked too thin. And as the snow begins to fall again softly, steadily, silently, you pull your hood up, sigh into your scarf, and step back onto the street. Warm, hidden, stylish, and probably safer from frostbite than any 21st century fashion influencer trying to survive in thin denim. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, a fine dusting of snow settling onto your shoulders, like confetti from a very polite celebration. Ahead looms a domed structure, a caravanserai, sturdy and square, built for traders and travelers. Its thick walls are meant to trap warmth, and its layered arches seem to whisper secrets from every road that ever led here. You step inside, brushing off your cloak, and immediately your toes sigh in relief. The stone underfoot still holds the memory of last night's fire. The air inside smells of wool, roasted chestnuts, damp straw, and one overly enthusiastic clove sachet. Merchants sip thick coffee from copper cups, cloaks drawn tightly around their shoulders. Your fingers brush the soft velvet trim of a hanging coat. By the entrance, deep burgundy trimmed with sable fur, heavy enough to double as a portable blanket in a power outage. Ottoman fashion didn't just aim for beauty. It was a strategy, a defense against the cold, a lifestyle, a power statement wrapped in silk and animal pelts. You settle near a brazier, warming your hands. The man beside you adjusts his shalvar, those voluminous trousers that balloon like they're hiding state secrets, or maybe just layers of thermal padding. These pants weren't just for show. Their looseness trapped warm air close to the skin, creating a kind of wearable fireplace effect. Genius, really. Try doing that in skinny jeans. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. The Ottoman court was famous for regulating dress according to rank. From the color of your turban wrapping to the type of fur on your collar, everything said something. Viziers might flaunt sable while a lower official wore fox. Artisans may be rabbit if they were lucky, and the rabbits weren't unionizing. These visual codes made it easy to spot someone's position from across a courtyard or in line for stew. Nearby, an older woman repairs a torn mitten using a needle threaded with gold-toned silk. Her hands are steady, practiced. She hums as she works some forgotten tune from a village further east where winters are longer and coats even thicker. Historians still argue whether women's winter wear in the empire was primarily influenced by Islamic modesty traditions or regional necessity. What's clear, though, is that warmth and style weren't mutually exclusive. Picture ankle-length terrace lined with cotton batting outer cloaks made of quilted wool and veils doubled over to stop wind from sneaking in like a nosy ant. You take a sip of tea offered by the caravanserai host. It's so hot you almost lose the roof of your mouth, but it tastes like safety cardamom cinnamon, possibly a hint of rose. Your tongue will recover. Eventually. You spy someone across the room laying out winter boots to dry, leather calf-high lined with sheepskin. Practical, yes, but also the stitching forms tiny patterns, swirls, stars, maybe even a miniature tulip or two. In this world, even your footwear makes a poetic statement. Step softly, but make sure your boots are telling a story. A quirky tidbit: Ottoman tailors were known to stuff garments with fragrant herbs during the winter, not just to ward off moths, but to keep the wearer feeling fresh, even when snow turned to slush. and everyone smelled like soggy firewood. Picture strolling through a cold, crowded bazaar while smelling faintly of mint and marjoram. Is it weird? A little. Is it brilliant? Absolutely. Outside the windows, snow continues to drift sideways in lazy spirals. You think of the Janissaries again, elite troops who also needed winter gear. Their long cloaks, often dyed in rich hues, gave them a superhero silhouette, a walking wall of color and discipline, and probably several layers of flannel beneath it all, because standing guard in sub-zero temperatures while wearing epaulettes is no joke. The fire crackles. You shift again, comforted by the rhythm of the room. The Ottomans loved symmetry. Even their architecture seems to hum in repeating patterns. You wonder if their approach to clothing was similar, a sense of balance between form and function, restraint and expression. You imagine trying to explain fast fashion to someone here. They'd squint, adjust their perfectly folded turban, and ask, "Why would you wear something once?" You spot a teenage boy across the room embroidering the hem of his mother's winter cloak. It's a simple design, stars circling a crescent moon, but the thread glints in the firelight. He frowns in concentration. You watch his fingers move and feel your eyelids droop just a little. Maybe it's the warmth. Maybe it's the hum of history pressing against you like a quilt too old to fold properly. One merchant laughs, slapping a friend on the back, his overcoat trailing behind like a regal train. They talk of roots and horses, of salt caravans and blizzards survived, and you think winter fashion here wasn't just about warmth. It was memory. A sleeve lined by your grandmother, a hat passed down by your father, a scarf whose pattern matched the one in your childhood storybook. You rise slowly, cloak trailing like a lazy river behind you, and step outside. The cold hits you again, a little less sharp now that you're fortified. Snowflakes swirl around your hood, and your boots crunch into a fresh layer of frost. A dog trots past in a little felt coat, clearly someone's pampered pet, or possibly the mayor. You move on, down the slope through steam rising from sewer grates, into the heart of a city that wears winter like a second skin, and so do you. Your breath curls like smoke as you follow the lantern-lit alleyways down toward the marketplace. Snow settles quietly on stone windowsills and tiled rooftops, wrapping Istanbul in a hush, like the city itself is dozing off mid-sentence. And honestly, that sounds kinda perfect. You tuck your hands into the fur-lined sleeves of your kaftan. Yes, your imagination is now fully committed to this whole winter in Ottoman Turkey cosplay, and shuffle forward. Somewhere nearby, a vendor is roasting chestnuts again, and the scent wraps around you like a weighted blanket that smells faintly of holidays and slightly burnt sugar. As you emerge into the square, a bustling market unfolds beneath twinkling lanterns. Merchants call out lazily, too cold for full-volume haggling, and you spot a stall stacked with fabric bolts. Velvet brocade wool dyed in pomegranate skins and madder root. Rich reds and impossibly deep blues, the kind of hues you only get when someone spends weeks boiling bugs in a copper vat. You run your fingers over a bolt of creamy white felt thick enough to stop a spear or at least a very determined draft. An older man adjusts his massive woolen turban beside you, muttering about imported dyes and cold toes. His coat has exaggerated sleeves that hang like soft flags flapping gently when he gestures toward a set of embroidered mittens. His beard, streaked with gray, disappears into the folds of his scarf. You nod politely, unsure if he's complaining or reciting a weather poem. It's all charming, either way. You pause to inspect some outerwear floor-length coats called sepkin, or ferace, some worn by women, others by scholars or Sufi mystics. Historians still argue whether the wide sleeves on winter garments were meant for carrying scrolls or just really, really big sandwiches. Either way, they look cozy. You imagine hiding your entire snack stash in there like a warm-blooded squirrel. One vendor excitedly waves a handkerchief in your direction, trying to tempt you with a pair of embroidered socks. You raise an eyebrow. Socks. In a winter market full of fur-lined capes and quilted cloaks, He must sense your skepticism. Yak wool, he says in accented Ottoman Turkish. From the east, warm like a stove on your feet. You hold one up, and yes, it's thick, soft, and smells faintly of campfire and yak, which is oddly comforting. As you wander deeper into the market, you pass a group of boys throwing snowballs. Their cloaks billow dramatically, and one shouts something about Suleiman's beard being icier than his throwing arm. A nearby baker tuts at the racket, brushing snow from the steps of his stall, the heat from his oven steaming his windows. Inside, pastries glisten under powdered sugar like tiny snowdrifts. You duck beneath a striped awning where a woman sells buttons all carved from bone shell, and sometimes she claims teeth. Winter needs strong closures, she says, or wine will sneak into your soul. She's probably exaggerating. Probably. A mainstream historical fact floats to the surface of your tea-steeped brain. Ottoman winter garments weren't just about staying warm. They reflected a massive empire-wide trade network. Wool came from Anatolia, silk from Persia, dyes from India, and fur from the frigid north. Even simple garments could be geopolitical statements. Imagine buttoning up your coat and unintentionally announcing, "Yes, I'm wearing Polish squirrel fur and Iranian indigo. Fight me." You pass a tailor's stall where apprentices work by lantern light, stitching decorative braids into the lining of winter cloaks. A young man holds up two nearly identical pieces of trim, one golden, one brassiere, and sighs dramatically. "What would the Grand Vizier wear?" he mutters, clearly agonizing. You almost tell him to flip a coin, but he seems to be having a deep existential crisis, so you let him vibe in peace. Quirky tidbit incoming: in some Ottoman regions, folks wore layered quilted vests, known as yorgan yellowclary, which were essentially wearable bedding. Picture grandma's thickest comforter transformed into a puffy vest you could nap in at a moment's notice. It was the Snuggie before Snuggies were cool, except with intricate embroidery and less late-night infomercial energy. Another scholarly debate. Some experts believe the proliferation of layered fashion in the Ottoman winter wardrobe stemmed more from architectural limitations than weather severity. In short, when your buildings don't insulate well, you learn to dress like a nesting doll. Others argue it's just the result of fashion trends drifting in from Central Asia. Either way, if you wanted to be warm, stylish, and ever so slightly extra, this was the place to be. The market begins to wind down. Merchants douse lanterns and drape wool blankets over their remaining goods. You watch a child carefully help her mother roll up lengths of fabric, her tiny mittens barely gripping the edge. She's bundled in a mini version of her mother's coat, complete with tassels, and a hood that makes her look like a wandering forest gnome. If adorably snug were a historical category, she'd be its mascot. You circle back toward the square's edge where a fountain still trickles despite the cold. Icicles form delicate chandeliers from its edges. You rest on a bench dusted with snow, feeling the softness of your imaginary fur collar against your neck. Your toes tingle slightly from the chill, but your layers do their job. Ottoman winter fashion 1010, wood bundle again. A pair of Sufi dervishes pass by their cloaks, swaying with quiet grace, turbans wrapped high and thick to trap heat. One of them is whistling low and melodic like wind through reeds. They disappear around a corner and silence returns to the square. The air smells of cinnamon wool and 100 distant fires. You lean back, watching your breath disappear into the sky, and wonder how many coats you'd have to wear to feel this kind of warm in real life. Probably just one, as long as it's lined with yak. The wind has quieted now, curling softly around the corners of the square like a cat deciding whether to curl up or cause chaos. You rise, stretching the warmth back into your joints, and wander past a stone archway flanked by flickering torches. They barely hold back the dark, and yet the shadows ahead seem inviting. There's a promise in them of thicker fabric, quieter footsteps, and even warmer tales. You follow a narrow street lined with wooden townhouses, their upper stories jutting out just enough to create a sort of covered lane. From the latticed windows above, flickers of candlelight reveal the cozy world. Inside, low tables, cushions, and figures nestled under layers of wool. You imagine you're one of them, sipping steaming rose-hip tea under a pile of quilts, while snow taps at the glass like a nosy neighbor. Ottoman homes, you've learned, weren't exactly central heating champions. Fireplaces were a thing, yes, but they weren't ubiquitous. Instead, people relied on mangle, those charcoal braziers set in the center of rooms. You huddle closer to your mental mangle now, warming your imaginary toes. They give off a deep, radiating heat, and the faintest crackle of coal is a lullaby all its own. But the real trick: layers. Ottoman winter fashion indoors wasn't just about staying warm, it was about doing it with subtle flair. Your outer kaftan may be off now, hung up neatly by the door, but underneath you're still wrapped in a cozy quilted icegomli, an inner shirt perhaps stitched by your grandmother with gold-threaded cuffs, because she believed quite rightly that winter wasn't an excuse to be boring. You pass a doorway where a family gathers cross-legged around a steaming pot of lentil soup. The aroma spills into the alley, earthy and rich. A teen reaches for a piece of bread, his sleeves drooping into his bowl, and no one bats an eye. Ottoman winter wear was generous like that, built for comfort, not for TikTok. Well, okay, TikTok didn't exist, but you get it. You remember reading somewhere, maybe in one of those old coffee table books from the library, that Ottoman houses often had sofa areas, open covered spaces, designed to let air flow in summer and light penetrate in winter. Cushions everywhere. People practically lived in those spaces, especially during the cold months, wrapped in blankets, gossiping or embroidering, or both. Historians still argue whether the thick woolen robes worn indoors were a status symbol or just practical insulation. Some suggest that layering fine silks underneath rough wool was a way to flaunt your wealth in secret, a private opulence for chilly evenings. Others think it was purely about surviving the draftiness with your toes intact. You decide it's probably both, because who doesn't want to feel luxurious and warm while dunking bread into soup? You find yourself lingering outside a shop that sells old books and prayer rugs. A cat blinks at you from a ledge above its tail, wrapped neatly around itself like a miniature fur stole. You nod respectfully. Cats ruled the Ottoman streets like tiny, self-satisfied emperors, and yes, some of them probably had better winter accommodations than you do. Quirky tidbit incoming: some high-status Ottomans, particularly palace officials, wore indoor slippers lined with sable fur. That's right. Not rabbit, not sheep, sable. You picture your own fuzzy house shoes and feel suddenly underdressed. No offense, Target brand memory foam, but you've been officially outclassed by a 17th century vizier. As you turn a corner, your footfalls muffled by the snow-dusted stone, you stumble upon a hammam, a Turkish bathhouse lit softly from within by stained glass windows. Steam coils lazily from its vents, like a genie trying to escape at its own pace. You don't go in, not yet, but you can practically feel the damp warmth from here. And here's a mainstream fact that might surprise you: people in the Ottoman Empire didn't just use hammams for bathing. In the winter months, they were an oasis of warmth, places to thaw out your bones, gossip, drink tea, and even get a little back massage while wrapped in a heated pestimol towel. Some folks came just to escape the cold, not even bothering with the scrub down. Think of it like the 1600s version of camping out in a heated Starbucks lobby. You imagine the bathhouse now, steam rising like silk conversations bubbling softly over the sound of dripping water. You can see women in the private section giggling, adjusting their towels, sipping sherbet. That's fruit syrup, not sherbet, though. Both are fun, and pretending they're not, eavesdropping on the next stall over. Historians have long debated whether the hammam's role as a winter refuge was a planned architectural feature or a happy accident of steamy engineering. Some argue that the high stone domes were designed specifically to trap heat and channel condensation, while others say it's just what happens when you heat water indoors and don't open a window for 5 centuries. Either way, the result is soothing. You linger outside the bathhouse for a moment longer, letting your fingers trail across the warm, damp wall. There's something timeless about this, how the cold pushes people inward together into spaces heavy with steam and secrets. It's the same in your world now, too. Winter makes social animals of all of us, or at least cuddly ones. You turn away at last, your breath catching the lantern light, and continue along the winding path. A child dashes past in felt slippers and a too large robe, giggling, pursued by a boy wielding a feather duster like a saber. You pause, smile, and adjust the edge of your own imaginary robe. Your steps carry you away from the warmth of windows and into a quieter street, the kind lined with cypress trees and old sleepy fountains. The snow is deeper here, muffling even your thoughts. Somewhere behind you, laughter still echoes like a memory wrapped in wool. It's late now, the city exhales again, and so do you. The cold deepens, but it's no longer a nuisance. You've accepted it now, like an overly affectionate houseguest clinging a little too long but meaning well. You move through the quieter quarter of the city, where the tiled domes of mosques rise like great sleeping animals, their surfaces dusted with snow and shimmering beneath the moonlight. Here winter feels ceremonial. You duck into a covered market, well, technically a Bedtime, the beating heart of Ottoman trade and craftsmanship. Even at night you swear you hear faint murmurs, traders whispering deals, the clink of coins, the hush of fabric unrolling. In your mind it's never really empty, just resting, like the city itself. Your slippers slide on smooth stones and you pause in front of a merchant's stall shuttered for the night. Bolts of cloth are stacked like cinnamon rolls behind iron grills, velvets, brocades, rough-spun wool dyed in deep, inky hues. It's all so inviting. You half expect the fabrics to breathe in the quiet. These were the materials of winter luxury tailored into thick kaftans, winter turbans, and the famed Ottoman fireplace, a sort of cloak generous and flowing, the kind that makes you feel like you should be sipping sherbet and casually reshaping history. Mainstream fact-time Ottoman winter fashion wasn't a seasonal afterthought. It was a carefully curated aesthetic. Tailors were divided by specialty, with winter wear often requiring its own breed of artisans. Garments were lined with fur, fox, beaver, and in some cases imported Russian sable if you were feeling particularly extra. You picture yourself wrapped in one now, gliding across polished marble like a sassy 16th century ghost. There's an old Janissary proverb that goes something like, "A stiff wind respects a layered man." Okay, we made that up, but it sounds legit, doesn't it? Inside this marketplace you stumble upon a curious sight, an old wooden mannequin wearing a disassembled winter kaftan. The outer layer is an ornate damask, but what's fascinating is the inside quilted flannel with tiny stitched charms sewn discreetly into the seams. Crescent moons, tulips, even a tiny embroidered lion. Was this protection fashion a grandmother's personal flair? Historians still argue whether these charms were symbolic, meant to ward off evil, encourage fertility, or simply keep a child quiet for more than 3 seconds. Some think they were part of folk beliefs that coexisted quietly alongside formal Islam. Others believe they were nothing more than affectionate superstitions stitched in during long, snowy nights when the city was hushed under white. You reach out to touch the cloth, and for a moment the world goes still. That particular silence of heavy snow, so quiet, it thuds. You imagine tailors hunched over lamplight, the air thick with smoke and soap hands red from the cold, as they pin and stitch and mutter about missed deadlines. One quirky tidbit: elite women of the palace were so into winter fashion that some kaftans were made solely for seated appearances, meaning you could barely walk in them, but you looked fantastic reclining on a divan. You think of modern influencers and realize not much has changed. You don't always need mobility when you've got perfect angles. Further down the corridor, a small side door creaks open to an artisan's workshop. You peek in empty now, but the tools are still laid out with purpose. Needles, spools, and bolts of fleece stacked beside containers of indigo and madder root. These were the lifeblood of Ottoman color. Even in the depths of winter, fashion had to dazzle, especially during celebrations. Ah, yes, winter festivals. You remember hearing of Shebi Arus, the wedding night of Rumi, commemorated with candle-lit, whirling dervishes, dressed in voluminous white robes, spiritual fashion, if you will. Or how about the winter circumcision feasts for young boys of noble families, where they were dressed like tiny emperors in fur-trimmed robes and feathered turbans that probably weighed more than the kid did. Here's a historical footnote: during especially cold seasons, even the sultan was known to distribute warm garments to the poor kaftans, cloaks, even boots. It was part piety, part PR, but either way it kept a lot of people from freezing. Records even describe public fires set in squares with soup and lentils served beside giant braziers. You can almost hear the ladles clinking against metal pots. As you walk through the dim corridors of the bazaar, you notice how warm it stays in here. Not because of modern insulation, because of centuries of layered stone, clever engineering, and good old-fashioned body heat. You press a hand against the wall, warm, still, like the building itself is sighing. In one recessed alcove, there's a stack of rolled woolen hats, Burke, some tall, others round and plush, each signaling a different class, profession, or mood. Historians argue whether these hats were functional warmth or coded status, likely both. One particular style with ear flaps and a ridiculously long topknot makes you chuckle. Fashion, eternal friend of questionable choices. But these weren't just hats, they were part of an identity. A fur-lined cap meant you belonged somewhere: the court, the barracks, the guild, or the bakery. The more outrageous the plume or fur, the more likely you were about to issue a decree or sell someone overpriced saffron. You pause by a fountain, its trickle slowed to a whisper, and sit on the low marble bench. You pull your imaginary fur cloak tighter around you, sighing. There's something strangely modern about all this, how we still perform the same rituals in cold seasons, bundling up, layering textures, showing off in small, cozy ways. And sure, you're not in 17th century Istanbul, walking through a snow-glazed bazaar by moonlight, but your oversized hoodie and favorite socks, totally on brand for Ottoman winter luxury. Comfort has always been currency. A gust of cold pushes through the hallway like a ghost, reminding you to keep moving. You rise, the hush of the market wrapping around your shoulders like a friend who doesn't say much but never leaves. The lamps above flicker, casting kaleidoscope shadows, and you feel yourself drawn toward another corner. Far off, a single cat yowls, offended by something invisible, as cats often are. You follow the echo of that offended cat, as if it's your guide, weaving through narrow lanes where the stones are slick from melted snow and ancient footsteps. The cold has a rhythm now. It doesn't bite so much as tap you on the shoulder every few moments, like a nosy relative checking you haven't forgotten your scarf. You emerge into a quieter district, just beyond the bustle of the Grand Bazaar. Here the air smells faintly of damp wood and spices clinging to the cracks in the walls. You tilt your head toward the rooftops. Chimneys exhale soft wisps of smoke into the night sky, joining the stars in their own sleepy exodus. This part of the city holds the artisan lodges, the lonka, not quite guilds in the European sense, but deeply communal tradesmen's organizations that governed everything from quality control to apprenticeships. Tonight, you're slipping into one of the more snug ones, the furrier's lodge. Imagine it a low-ceilinged chamber warmed by a central hearth rugs, stacked like lasagna, and heavy furs hanging from every beam. A place that smells of leather tallow and slightly overcooked tea. You walk softly across the wooden floor, trying not to disturb the invisible crowd of craftsmen who still seem to linger in the air. Mainstream fact: fur in the Ottoman Empire wasn't just about warmth. It was status, big, fluffy, unmistakable status. Wearing Russian sable in winter was like rolling up to a snowstorm in a velvet-lined limousine. Not cheap, not subtle, and definitely not for peasants. Even the Janissaries' Ottoman elite soldiers had designated winter cloaks trimmed in practical, durable fur. Nothing screams "don't mess with me" like a guy in a sword belt and a fuzzy collar. You bend beside a bench scattered with half-finished garments. There's a sheared fox pelt being stitched to silk-lining strange bedfellows, really. A tiny tag dangles from the sleeve written in the slanted Ottoman script for the governor's daughter. You smile. Someone's winter just got a lot cozier. Here's a fringe tidbit that's almost too good to be true. It's said that one Grand Vizier commissioned a winter robe so long and lined with so many types of fur that it required 2 attendants just to carry the train. It wasn't a robe so much as a parade float. Practical, number legendary, absolutely. You crouch beside a pile of scraps, foxtails, mink strips, even some ermine bits dyed a peculiar shade of blue. You run your fingers over them and feel a kind of time-traveling sympathy for those long-dead animals, and equally long-dead tailors. They all contributed to a city trying to stay warm and maybe look fabulous doing it. Scholars still argue whether fur trade regulations in the empire were primarily driven by ethics, economy, or straight-up fashion envy. Some records suggest Ottoman officials tried limiting fur imports during harsh winters to make sure local tailors profited. Others say it was to control public displays of wealth. Either way, you're beginning to see how complicated staying warm could be. You glance toward the hearth again. A well-worn kettle sits just off the flame, its sides blackened by years of use. Tea, unsurprisingly, was a major part of surviving winter. True, the coffeehouse was king in Ottoman social life, but in private people brewed strong spiced teas with cinnamon and cloves that hugged you from the inside out. You wish you had a cup now. As you sit by the fire warming your thoughts, you remember the palace again. Topkapi in winter was a flurry of controlled extravagance. Fires were stoked constantly in tiled rooms, and marble floors were covered with kilams and carpets so thick you could lose a slipper in them. There were rumors that during especially harsh winters, the harem women wore fur-lined socks embroidered with gold thread and little bells. That last part may have been poetic license, but you desperately want it to be true. In fact, fringe stories say that palace officials invented specific winter walking routes that let them avoid the coldest courtyards and pass through heated chambers like a sort of bureaucratic sauna crawl. Can you imagine navigating your office today based on radiator proximity? Actually, yes, very easily. You rise, the fire behind you casting a sleepy glow as you step back into the street. Snow has begun to fall again, thicker now, like the sky is shaking out its pillow. The flakes cling to your cloak as you move, muffling the world with their quiet insistence. Down another lane you stumble across a fur shop still faintly glowing from within. A back door left ajar, perhaps. You peek inside. Rolls of fur stacked like firewood, and on the wall a curious painting, a sultan seated on a throne made entirely of what appears to be sheep. Sheep in coats. It's both majestic and oddly pastoral. Your fingers brush the furs hanging from the ceiling, some soft, some scratchy. You find a patch of Persian lamb with curls so tight it feels like hugging a spiral notebook. Another is stiff, clearly untreated, perhaps for boots or outdoor wear. Quirky footnote here: the Janissaries allegedly used fur hats as secret messaging tools. Different colors or linings indicated alliances or warnings. Whether it's true or just historical fan fiction, it does make you look at accessories with a bit more suspicion. Historians still argue whether certain fur patterns, like the elusive tiger stripe sable, were real trade items or the stuff of travelers' exaggeration. Merchants were notorious for embellishing inventory descriptions. Yes, my friend, this is bear fur, very rare, almost extinct bear, only sneezes once a year. You'd probably buy it. Back outside, the snow now crunches under your feet like walking across a very expensive breakfast cereal. The night feels deeper somehow, like the whole city is burrowed under its fur layers, waiting for spring. You pull your own cloak tighter and glance up. The stars blur slightly through the falling snow, and the mosques begin to look like sleeping creatures wrapped in their own embroidered blankets. It's oddly comforting. Comfort. That was always the hidden luxury, wasn't it? Not the fur, not the velvet, not even the bells on your golden threaded socks, but the feeling of being held, wrapped, swaddled. Ottoman winter fashion understood this. It wasn't about Fashion Week, it was about endurance, yes, but endurance with flair. You drift deeper into the maze of Istanbul's winter streets where shadows and lamplight tangle together like old lovers wrapped in shawls. There's a scent now faint but unmistakable of beeswax rosewater and what might be cloves. It guides you toward one of the quieter treasures of Ottoman cold-weather culture, the private bathhouse, or hammam. Yes, you're still outside your boots crunching softly across uneven stones, but in your mind's eye, and soon, quite literally, you're slipping through the doors of a lesser-known winter haven, a cozy neighborhood hammam centuries old, tucked beside a sleepy mosque courtyard like a secret. The door creaks, warm mist rolls out. You step into a world where the walls sweat and the silence hums. And just like that, the cold stays behind. Ottoman bathhouses weren't just about cleaning off the day's dirt and awkward political alliances. They were social hubs, therapy centers, and in the frigid months, warm wombs of community life. Heated marble slab steam rising like ghosts of arguments past, and people lounging in towels talking local gossip and court intrigue. This is how you survive February without developing frostbite or an existential crisis. Mainstream fact here: during winter, hammams saw a dramatic increase in visitors. Not just because cleanliness is next to godliness, but because being warm was next to possible. The floors were heated through a hypocaust system, basically an ancient underfloor radiator, and the hot air was channeled through cleverly designed vents. The Ottomans didn't invent it, thank the Romans for that, but they definitely perfected it. You glance around. The attendant offers you a peshtamal, a traditional cotton towel, thin but surprisingly warm when wrapped snug. You nod politely. No need to mention the Turkish delight you slipped into your pocket earlier. Priorities. Quirky detail in wealthier hammams. It wasn't unusual to scent the steam itself. Attendants tossed bundles of herbs, lavender, eucalyptus, even mint into copper basins, so the steam felt less like a science experiment and more like spa day for your lungs. You stretch out on the heated marble and let the warmth sink into your bones. Around you, voices murmur in Turkish and Armenian, Arabic, and Greek. Istanbul has always been a mosaic of tongues, and when everyone's nearly naked, status melts a little. A merchant and a janissary might argue over soap scents. A court poet might eavesdrop and write a scandalous sonnet about the governor's receding hairline. Equal parts spa and surveillance network. Historians still argue whether these bathhouses served more political purposes than personal. Were alliances made under the steam away from court ears? Did palace eunuchs and advisors pass secrets in whispers over exfoliating scrubs? It's hard to say. But if you've ever spilled your biggest secrets in a sauna, you understand how slippery loyalty can get when your pores are open. You trail your fingers along the condensation streaking down the tile. Ottoman artisans took pride in these places. The tiles, often Iznik ceramics, weren't just there to look pretty. They reflected light, resisted mold, and made it easier to wipe away centuries of drama. The blue and white floral patterns twist under your gaze like vines curling around old stories. There's a moment, maybe two, where you forget time altogether. The warm marble lulls your senses and someone nearby is humming, not a song you know, but soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic. Could be an old lullaby or maybe the theme music to 15th century small talk. Either way, you're floating. Then with zero warning, someone dumps cold water on you. It's part of the ritual, of course. The contrast sharpens. The senses help circulation reminds you that yes, life is fleeting and full of surprises, like surprise taxes or surprise in-laws. You gasp, shiver, then laugh. You weren't ready, but honestly, you never are. One attendant, a wiry man who looks like he's scrubbed the sins off 1,000 souls, offers you a mitt. Not a handshake, but a kese, a rough exfoliating glove. You nod. Let the past few centuries of dead skin be scrubbed away, gently, with love, and maybe just a little vengeance. Quirky side note, there are tales of bath attendants who became so revered for their scrubbing technique that sultans requested them personally. Imagine being so good at exfoliation that you earn a royal summons. Talk about having soft power. You take a sip from the brass fountain nearby. The water is cool, clear, and somehow ancient, like it remembers being drawn in clay pots during Mehmed the Conqueror's time. You picture a boy running down icy steps to deliver hot water to the bathhouse, slipping, spilling, then laughing in that full-bodied way only someone who's not paying the water bill can manage. As your time in the hammam draws to a close, you wrap yourself in layers again. This time, though, the cold outside feels less aggressive. Like an ex you've learned to set boundaries with. You know it's still out there lurking behind the steam, but it no longer bothers you as much. You step into the night. The sky above you is impossibly deep, almost purple with the stars smeared like someone spilled a jar of sugar across velvet. Your skin steams faintly in the air like a kettle forgotten on a snowy windowsill. You're relaxed. You're warm. You're ever so slightly exfoliated. As you walk on, you remember one last tidbit. In some rural hammams, especially during colder months, locals believed that steam could cleanse not just the body, but the soul. They told stories of people leaving their old troubles behind in the rising mist, that perhaps if you looked closely at the ceiling, you might see your worries curling away like smoke. You glance back at the glowing windows of the bathhouse. Maybe they were right. You feel lighter. Or maybe that's just the missing layer of dead skin. Either way, Istanbul's winter has you in its gentle, ridiculous grip, and you're just fine with that. You continue walking through the winding lanes of Istanbul now with skin that smells faintly of lavender and achievement. The bathhouse is behind you, the cold once again tiptoeing at your heels, but you've been fortified, scrubbed, steamed, exfoliated into spiritual resilience. And now it's time for another kind of warmth, the fashion-forward type. Not far from the hammam, under the dim flicker of oil lamps, you spot them silhouettes cloaked in layers of fabric that rustle like silk whispers. These are not just your everyday bundles of winter survival. These are statements. Welcome to the Ottoman Empire's hidden catwalk circa somewhere between 1450 and 1900, where staying warm meant staying stylish. Tonight you're focusing on coats, long ones, kaftans to be precise, flowing, layered, often absurdly embroidered garments that made sure everyone knew two things: how cold it was and how much thread you could afford. Kaftans were the unofficial winter business card of the Ottoman elite. You wear one, you're saying, yes, I am wealthy. Yes, I am warm. No, I do not run. Mainstream fact. Ottoman sultans owned hundreds of kaftans, many of them winter weight lined with fur sewn with gold thread, and sometimes passed down like sacred family heirlooms, or that one weird couch your great-aunt insists you'll appreciate once you're older. The Topkapi Palace Museum still holds dozens of them, preserved like royal ghosts in glass coffins. One particularly regal winter kaftan was lined with sable fur and decorated with Chinese cloud motifs. Globalization. Oh, the Ottomans practically invented it. Silk from Persia, furs from the Russian steppe buttons forged in Venice and tailoring, well, that was homegrown thanks to workshops filled with master artisans who really got the concept of drape. As you picture slipping one on, you realize it's not just clothing, it's armor. Against cold, against irrelevance, against the subtle cruelty of winter wind sneaking under your collar, you tug your imaginary kaftan tighter. You are a sultan now. Well, a very sleepy, very moisturized one. But what about the average person, you wonder? Surely they weren't waltzing around in gold-stitched robes with yak fur linings, correct? Enter the world of layered wool, quilted cotton, and the ever-reliable Abba cloak. Worn by scholars, tradesmen, and frankly anyone with a pulse, the Abba was the people's winter coat, durable, warm, and mercifully less itchy than you'd think. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ottoman cloaks often had little secret pockets sewn into them, perfect for tucking away a coin, a worry bead, or a love note you swore you wouldn't send, but wrote anyway after too much cinnamon coffee. Some were even lined with perfumed cloth, because who says your outerwear can't flirt? You pause at a fabric stall just closing for the night. Bolts of wool and silk lie like sleeping cats, their patterns coiled and drowsy. A tailor is extinguishing his lantern. He nods as you pass, as if to say you would have looked good in blue velvet with silver trim. You agree silently, obviously. Historians still argue whether Ottoman winter fashion was more symbolic than practical. Was it about insulation or intimidation? Did the massive sleeves and structured shoulders make men seem broader, more powerful? Or did they simply trap heat like an elaborate thermal blanket with political ambitions? Maybe both. This is a culture that blended aesthetic with purpose better than a hipster coffee shop using reclaimed wood. Form met function in the most flamboyant of ways. Even children's winter garments were layered and tailored, with little sashes tied just so, because nothing says "I'm 7" and freezing like a belt embroidered with tulips. The women's winter attire, too, was complex. Indoors, you'd wear soft layers of antari and shalvar, those loose, billowy trousers perfect for dramatic sighing and cat-like lounging. Outdoors, it was all about layering thick cloaks, velvet mantles, perhaps a fur-lined forace, and always a veil or headscarf to protect from the cold and unsolicited advice from strangers. No one does multitasking like Ottoman women. And don't get started on the boots. Pointed leather ones, often handmade, sometimes dyed crimson. They looked like they could either crush dissent or tiptoe through a poetry recital, both depending on the outfit. Some even had tiny bells sewn on, which sounds festive until you remember that snow is not the quiet powder of pumpcards, it's slush ice and the occasional frozen goat. You pass a pair of musicians huddled under a woven awning, their hands tucked inside the long sleeves of their coats as they sip from shared tea. The melody they play is soft, wintry flute and zither twining together like warm threads in an old scarf. You feel your footsteps slow. The wind does too. There's an old Ottoman proverb echoing in your ears: winter is the tailor's true test. And you get it now. Anyone can design for comfort or flash, but to wrap someone in something that keeps out cold, lifts the spirit, and quietly whispers, "Yes, you still look fantastic," that's the real magic. You pull your cloak tighter, even if it's imaginary, and glance up. The stars are out again. Someone's burning sweet wood nearby, and the smoke swirls like ribbon. Somewhere, someone's hemming another winter kaftan. Somewhere, a grandmother is darning socks by candlelight and telling stories about the time a coat saved her brother from frostbite and embarrassment. And here you are threading through their stories like a careful stitch. You keep walking, the imaginary weight of your luxurious kaftan trailing behind you like royalty with nowhere urgent to be. The streets have quieted, leaving you with the crunch of your boots on the stones and a chilly breeze that tries unsuccessfully to infiltrate your layered dreams. Up ahead, a flickering sign sways above a tea house still open despite the hour. You slip inside because what is winter in the Ottoman Empire without tea? The warmth of the interior fogs your eyelashes. This place smells like roasted chestnuts, honeyed figs, and the slow exhale of burning charcoal. Time here melts like butter on hot bread. You claim a corner seat near a brazier. A man in an embroidered vest sets down a tulip-shaped glass of steaming tea, the amber liquid swirling like cinnamon sunsets. No words are exchanged, just the nod of mutual understanding, warmth, hospitality. The universal language of you look like you've been wandering Ottoman streets in your imagination for hours. Tonight, you're settling into the fabrics that lived closest to the skin. The Ottoman layering philosophy wasn't just about coats, it began from within. Undergarments weren't merely functional. They were finely crafted, clean, and sometimes scented. The silk undershirts worn by the wealthy, for instance, were so sheer and soft, they reportedly weighed less than a slice of baklava. And yes, someone probably tested that. Mainstream fact, Ottomans believed that hygiene was part of faith, and changing undergarments regularly was not just about comfort, it was considered virtuous. Even soldiers on campaign were expected to carry spare Eitzgomlik inner shirts, and laundering was a weekly ritual, winter or not. But here's your quirky tidbit. Wealthy women often had their underlayers stitched with charm, tiny texts, bits of silver thread, or geometric motifs believed to protect them from illness or envy. Because apparently even your camisole could fight bad vibes. You sip your tea and the room hums softly with muffled conversation. Around you, people from all walks of life, merchants, poets, travelers, lean into their cups like the tea contains answers to very gentle riddles. You picture a young scholar reciting verses under his breath while unwrapping his zaban, a sort of cotton underrobe, soft as moonlight and better than flannel pajamas. Historians still argue whether some of these intimate garments were more about fashion or function. Was the embroidery on your undershirt a private indulgence? A secret message, a luxury only the mirror knew. The line between innerwear and outerwear was thinner than a thread, especially among the upper class. You glanced down at your imaginary Ottoman pajamas, layers of linen and silk, a sash tied loosely around the waist. Cozy, practical, a little dramatic, sure, but it's cold outside and your dignity depends on sleeping like a dashing 17th century bureaucrat. The tea server returns with a small plate of kastani shakeri, candied chestnuts wrapped in gold foil. Sweet, sticky, and slightly chewy, they're the empire's answer to winter gloom. As you nibble, your thoughts drift to winter nights, in the harem quarters where layers of fabric weren't just warmth, but social signals. Silk prestige, patterned cotton elegance with practicality, wool, a servant staple but spun and dyed with the same meticulous care as a courtier's robe. Somewhere behind velvet screens and painted wooden lattices, women recline on cushions with hot copper basins underfoot. Their robes cut wide and long trail onto the carpets. Their sleeves split for drama and movement fall open to reveal those fine perfumed layers beneath. They laugh, tell ghost stories, gossip about the new seamstress who stitched a coat so warm the wearer fell asleep outside by accident. You chuckle. That's the kind of endorsement fashion really needs. Outside the tea house, snow begins to fall again, gently this time, like flour dusted over a tray of fresh simmet. The flakes catch in your lashes as you step out, coat swirling behind you. You wrap your scarf, a wool one now hand-woven by a grandmother in Bursa, around your neck with ceremony. Every knot and fold a silent poem against the wind. Ottoman scarves, you remember, weren't just neck warmers. They were portable art, bright with floral designs or hand-loomed with subtle gradients. They could be made of wool, silk, or a mix called satma, which sounds like a sneeze but wears like a whisper. They adorned men and women alike, wrapped over turbans, across shoulders, around waists. In winter, they were necessity and flair, equal parts blanket and brag. You walk past a narrow alley where a tailor's lamp still glows. Someone's hemming a sleeve by hand, pulling thread through fabric in slow, rhythmic arcs. Maybe it's for a bride. Maybe it's for a boy headed to school. You realize how many thousands of hands stitch their way through these winters. Anonymous artisans who never signed their work, but left warmth behind anyway. You pause, pull your scarf tighter, and exhale. The breath escapes in a cloud, as if to say, yes, you are deeply snug, despite the fact that you're technically sitting upright in bed right now. A muffled clang echoes down the street, a closing gate maybe, or a sleepy guard kicking a brazier back to life. And just like that, you find yourself surrounded again by Ottoman winter wear, in all its forms: the quilted coat, the padded tunic, the silk-lined vest, the scarf tucked just so. And beneath it all, that warm inner layer no one sees but everyone needs, the base of it all, the whisper of fabric against skin, proof that even empires understood the comfort of a good undergarment. You walk slowly now, as though the streets themselves are wrapping around you, like a thick cotton blanket. Somewhere behind you, the tea-house door clicks shut. Ahead, the path glimmers slightly with a sugar dusting of snow. You feel the weight of 1,000 threads hugging your limbs, kaftans, scarves, underrobes, all imaginary but so real you can almost hear them rustling. It's time to talk accessories, because in the Ottoman winter wardrobe, what you wore on your fingers, head, and even ankles could tell someone everything from your social rank to your sense of humor. And more importantly, it kept you from becoming a human icicle. You turn a corner and see a market square where stalls are half covered for the night. But some linger, lantern-lit and colorful, with racks of gloves, rows of hats, and trays of rings and amulets sparkling in the light like frost-kissed pomegranate seeds. Mainstream fact: the Ottomans loved their accessories, and winter was no exception. From ornate belts and brooches to hand-stitched mittens, layering didn't stop at coats. A proper outfit involved careful attention to every part of the body, especially when the temperature dropped and your fashion needed to fight the cold and impress the crowd. Gloves weren't just practical, they were often personalized. Some were embroidered with verses of poetry or tiny charms sewn into the cuffs. You pick up a pair made of soft camel leather lined with fleece. The fingers are slightly curved, as though they've already held a warm cup of salep today. Quirky tidbit: certain Ottoman nobles wore rings with small hinged compartments, miniature scent diffusers that held bits of amber or clove. Just in case someone nearby smelled like 3-day-old pickled herring and political intrigue. Historians still argue whether these scented rings were purely for pleasure, or served a more medicinal role, warding off the bad air of winter illnesses. In a world before hand sanitizer and space heaters, your accessories might literally save your life and your date night. You pass a mirror propped against a tailor's stand and catch your reflection impossibly layered, decadently draped with gloves and scarf, now joined by a boldly feathered hat. Yes, hats. The crown jewel of winter flair. The Ottomans knew a good hat was a powerful thing. You could spot someone's class, ethnicity, profession, or even city of origin by the shape and height of what sat on their head. In winter, these headdresses were lined with fur or padded with wool. Some featured long tails of fabric that could be wrapped around the neck or face instant scarf action. The burk, for example, was a tall, rounded cap often worn by officials. It looked like something between a chef's hat and a helmet, and it often featured fur trim and a cloth band in bold colors. You could march into a snowstorm wearing one and emerge with your dignity and hairstyle intact. You pause by a wool merchant folding bolts of thick, dark fabric. He holds up a band of embroidered trim, gesturing that it could be used for a winter turban, a layered, wrapped style favored by scholars and poets. You imagine it on your head, warm, snug, and just dramatic enough to signal you read Persian love poetry by candlelight. Another vendor across the square sells amulets, tiny trinkets meant to ward off the evil eye tucked into cloaks, pinned to collars, or stitched into boot linings. A woman next to you whispers that her grandmother used to hide one in her glove so the cold wouldn't get ideas. You buy one, of course, because who wouldn't want extra protection from cold and cursed glances? As you walk, your footfalls grow softer. The snow has thickened underfoot, and the city is quieter than before. Up above, a row of windows glow faintly, a family gathered around a brazier, laughing and eating something warm and citrus-scented. You imagine the youngest child tossing his mittens into the air and shouting, "Mine are warmer than yours," and his sister replying, "Only because you stole the lining from my cloak." You smile. Accessories like stories are meant to be shared and sometimes fought over in good fun. You reach a quiet plaza now where a single shoe repair shop is still open. The cobbler waves you in with a smile. Inside, shelves of worn but lovingly restored boots line the walls. Each pair tells a story. This one saw the snowdrifts of Edirne, that one marched with a caravan to Damascus. Leather cracked by age, but softened by care. He offers you a pair to try. You slip them on, lined with lamb's wool, stitched by hands that know every curve of a heel, every flex of a foot. They fit naturally. You walk a few steps. The boots squeak slightly as if testing your resolve to wander further into this dreamscape. He nods approvingly. No words exchanged, just the language of properly winterized footwear. Back outside, your feet feel invincible. You glance down an alley where cats sleep curled on the rugs, wrapped in the heat rising from cellar vents. You wonder briefly if they're also wearing tiny invisible boots, then decide it's too late at night to entertain that level of whimsy. But that's the charm of Ottoman winterwear. It's steeped in whimsy and woven with intent. From gloves stitched with secrets to hats that announced your entire resume, accessories weren't afterthoughts. They were the punctuation marks of every outfit, and in winter they doubled as shields, charms, and declarations of taste. You wrap your scarf once more, adjust your mittens, and tip your imaginary feathered hat to no one in particular. Every layer of you now feels intentional, crafted not just for survival but for expression. A walking patchwork of comfort, identity, and style. The city exhales again, long and low, and so do you. The snow begins to fall heavier now, little silent messengers from the night sky that melt against your gloves and vanish on your shoulders. Everything's softened your pace, the lamplight, the distant sound of hooves clopping against cobblestone. You head towards the imperial district now, where the palaces and gardens of the elite glimmer faintly beneath a coat of frost. And here's where things get even more decadent. Tonight you're going inside. No more market stalls or street vendors. You're about to step into the cushioned, perfumed, silk-swathed world of Ottoman palace interiors and the ultimate winter indulgence, interior layering. Yes, you heard right. We're talking about layering indoors. Mainstream fact. The grand Ottoman palaces like Topkapı and Dolmabahce were marvels of architecture and engineering, but central heating. Not exactly their strong suit. While the walls were thick and the rugs abundant, when January rolled in like a damp, moody relative, the temperature indoors could plummet. So naturally, indoor clothing had to pull double duty, functional, and fabulously extra. You cross a tiled courtyard, footsteps muffled, and pass beneath a painted archway. The scent of rose oil, sandalwood, and fire-roasted chestnuts greets you. Velvet drapes hang heavy in the halls. Your boots click across heated marble panels. Yes, some rooms had rudimentary floor heating, though only in very special zones. Basically, a few lucky bottoms got warm feet. Quirky tidbit: one sultan reportedly kept warm by tucking a miniature brazier into a compartment under his divan, essentially an early Ottoman space heater hidden in the furniture. Which sounds convenient until you realize one bad kick and your couch might spontaneously combust. You find yourself in the harem, which, despite Western myths, was less a den of debauchery and more of a guarded, family-centered wing of the palace home to the sultan's mother, wives, and children. And let me tell you, the winter fashion game here, next level. The women of the harem didn't just layer for warmth, they layered for beauty hierarchy and subtle competition. Robes in rich satins and velvets, sleeves with fur-trimmed cuffs, slippers embroidered with gold thread, a favorite combination for chilly nights, a sheer patterned antari, a long inner robe over which would go a heavier kaftan cinched with an ornate sash, bonus points for brocade or fine cashmere imported from Persia or India. You step lightly into a chamber lit by oil lamps where you imagine a group of women sitting on floor cushions, sipping steaming quince tea. One reads aloud from a book of poetry while another spins golden thread onto a spindle. A younger girl yawns and tucks her bare toes under a cushion heated with smooth stones. Their laughter is muffled, gentle, safe. Historians still argue whether harem fashion influenced mainstream Ottoman trends or vice versa. But what's certain is that winter layering in these private spaces was both elegant and deeply practical. Think pajama party if your pajamas were hand-sewn by artisan tailors and possibly included rubies. You glide past a screen of inlaid wood and enter a hall meant for winter entertainment, walls thick with woven tapestries, ceiling beams from cedar groves now lost to time. A musician tunes a ney, the sound so breathy it might lull even a cranky eunuch into a nap. Someone offers you a blanket, not fleece, not wool, but a softly jarmin textile called jorgenlook, filled with cotton and stitched with delicate cloud motifs. You drape it over your shoulders and instantly feel cocooned. The Ottomans understood comfort wasn't just about heat, it was about ritual, about care, about wrapping yourself in the handmade memory of someone else's labor. A court lady passes by in shalvar, those wide-legged trousers gathered at the ankle. Ideal for cold weather when tucked into boots or worn with house slippers for lazy lounging near a brazier. Hers are striped purple and saffron, your kind of jealous. You make your way now to the Sultan's private library where rumor has it he'd read by the fire wrapped in 3 layers of robes and a fur-lined cape sipping cinnamon sherbet while holding a cat in each hand. Okay, the cat part is unconfirmed, but you choose to believe. Books here are bound in leather, each cover warmed by the touch of generations. One shelf features a manual on herb-laced winter teas. Another holds a treatise on cloud patterns in Anatolia, and nestled in a drawer, socks, hand-knit, possibly worn by a prince who didn't love swordplay but did love keeping his toes toasty. You sit near the fire, eyes catching the glint of a copper incense burner. The scent is rich clove myrrh, a little orange peel. These spices weren't just for show. They were believed to warm the air spiritually and physically, chasing off both bad moods and colds. You feel your own mood lift, not because you're royalty, but because in this moment, swaddled in memory and fabric, you understand what winter meant to the Ottomans, not just a season to survive, but one to style, to savor, and yes, to nap through when necessary. In a corner, a seamstress dozes with a spool of thread in her lap. The thread unwinds, slowly pooling like silk snow. You imagine her dreams are of patterns yet to be stitched, robes yet to be worn, lives wrapped in fabric not yet cut. Your own eyes flutter, the fire crackles, the jorgenlook slips slightly from your shoulder, but you don't move to fix it. You're warm enough now. And as the embers glow low and the last of the wind taps at the window, you understand something simple, something easy to forget. Sometimes the coziest place in the world is inside a robe, beside a fire where no one expects you to do anything but stay warm. The embers are dying low now, but their warmth still radiates softly across the patterned floor tiles, soaking into your toes like the last notes of a lullaby. You rise slowly, brushing off your borrowed robe, and step into the corridor again. The palace slumbers. The halls are hushed. But before we drift off entirely, there's one last cozy mystery to wrap ourselves in one final thread. In the thick quilt of Ottoman winter tradition, the secret lives of the hammam, the Turkish bathhouses during the frostiest months of the year. Mainstream fact: the Ottoman hammam wasn't just for scrubbing up. It was a daily ritual, a social hub, a medical treatment, and especially in winter, a sanctuary of warmth when the outside world turned icy. These bathhouses, modeled after Roman and Byzantine predecessors, were heated marvels of domed stone chambers, hot marble platforms, and cleverly engineered underfloor furnaces. You step out into the winter air just for a moment, wrapped tight in your ferace and boots. Snow crunches beneath your feet. Your destination steams invitingly in the distance. The hammam awaits like a giant sleeping animal exhaling clouds into the dusk. The marble steps inside are warm, not metaphorically. They're literally heated from below by a kulhan, a roaring furnace tended to by a half-mythical man known as the kulhanchi, the bathhouse firekeeper. And here's the thing: rumor has it that kulhanchis were never seen entering or exiting the furnace rooms. They were just always there, covered in soot, blinking through the steam like bathhouse goblins. Historians still argue whether this was just myth-making or if these soot-smeared ghosts really were a breed apart. You disrobe, and your skin prickles from the contrast chill to heat, air to steam. You glide into the hararet, the main hot room where slabs of polished marble warm your back like a sun-heated rock. Around you, the domed ceiling filters light through small glass lenses, and the air is thick with lavender, lemon peel, and eucalyptus oil. It's not quiet. There's always the sound of running water in a hammam, but it's the kind of white noise that wraps you up and hushes your thoughts. You scoop warm water from a brass basin and pour it over your shoulders. It's not just cleansing, it's erasing. Dead skin cells, gone, lingering stress evaporated. Doubts about whether a sherbet counts as soup, irrelevant. Quirky tidbit: winter was prime hammam season for socializing. Women especially used this space for gossip matchmaking, even business deals sometimes emerging hours later, pruny but powerful. Oh, and brides-to-be were sometimes sent in with scented soap and subtle spies to make sure they knew how to wash properly. Imagine learning someone judged your marriageability based on how thoroughly you exfoliated your elbows. You lie back now, eyes half-lidded, letting the hot mist open every pore and soften every muscle. And here's a delightful contradiction. Despite all the heated water and steamy air, many bathhouses offered a cold plunge option at the end, because nothing says relaxation like shocking your nervous system into momentary terror. But you skip the plunge. You dry off slowly with a pestimel, that signature checked cotton towel, and pull on thick wool socks wrapped in layers again like the softest armor. Someone hands you a cup of warm tamarind tea. You sip, your lips buzz, your spine sighs. As you step back out into the moonlight, your skin tingles from the heat, and the cold no longer bites. It's just refreshing, a whisper on your cheeks. You walk past the snow-covered stalls, the empty benches, the frosted trees bowing gently like sleepy dancers. The empire might stretch from the Danube to the Arabian Sea, from the frostbitten Balkans to sun-drenched Anatolia, but tonight, your universe is small, contained. Your whole world is a layered robe, a warm slipper, a distant bell marking evening prayer. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans were more pragmatic or more poetic in their winter rituals, but walking here through the softened silence of the old city, you feel it's always been both. Practicality draped in velvet, strategy steeped in rosewater. You catch your reflection in a puddle turned to ice just for a second, a bundled silhouette with fogged breath trailed by echoes of fur-lined cloaks and sandalwood incense. You smile. You've become a part of it now, the long lineage of people who didn't fight winter, but dressed for it fabulously. And as the night settles deep, The snow falls, slower, thicker, quieter. So now, dear traveler, slow your steps even more. The path behind you is soft and faded, and there's no rush to reach anywhere. You've walked through fire-lit halls and frost-covered courtyards, watched silk robes swirl beside brass braziers, and listened to the hush of bathhouse steam rise like a lullaby into the night. The chill no longer feels so sharp, does it? That's the beauty of the Ottoman way, layer upon layer, not just of clothing, but of care. Even in the coldest months, warmth wasn't just about heat. It was a rhythm, a ritual, a sense of being wrapped in time. Let the last of the snow settle around you. Let the muffled steps and sleepy whispers fade. That steam-slicked stone beneath your spine, that fire-scented air in your lungs, they're part of your dream now. And you are safe, you are warm, and there's nothing left to do tonight but rest. No markets to wander, no sultans to greet, no socks to admire, though really they were impressive, weren't they? Let your breath lengthen, let your muscles loosen, let the memory of cinnamon and rose water soften your thoughts like a slow lullaby woven through history. The fire is low, the blankets are thick, and outside the world hushes beneath falling snow. Sleep now wrapped in velvet echoes and stitched dreams.